Hey guys, welcome back to Required Reading. Sorry it's been just a little bit, but hopefully over the next couple of weeks we can go ahead and bring Gremlins to a wrap, maybe before the Christmas season. Regardless, this is Chapter 18 of the novelization of Gremlins, written by George Gipe. Dummy, she thought. You had an opportunity to get out of this place, but you blew it. It wasn't that long a chance, and making it would have involved a little shoving, but you had to act civilized and cool and sophisticated. So now you're a civilized, cool, and sophisticated prisoner, she mused, not going easy on the self-recriminations. It's even worse than that, she muttered under her breath, as she poured another round of drinks. It's a new definition of perpetual motion. I'm the only waitress for the thirstiest, meanest, sloppiest bunch of drunks in the world. What a living nightmare. Trapped behind the long rectangular bar at Dory's when the torrent of green demons poured through the door and enveloped her like a snag in a stream, Kate had initially diverted the gremlin's attention by mixing and pouring drinks as fast as she could and passing them around. It had worked, or at least kept the unruly mob from murdering her, or, as they used to say in cheap fiction, subjecting her to a fate worse than death. The problem was that there was no time to even think, much less plan a hasty and safe exit. As soon as she filled one batch of glasses, another batch of empties was plunked down in front of her by a leering, giggling, slimy-fanged customer. One consoling factor emerged as she carried out her arm-wearying ordeal. They weren't particular. At first, Kate had mixed real cocktails, Manhattans, martinis, whiskey sours, but soon it became obvious that they would drink anything. So, when a bottle of bourbon ran out, she added rum or tequila or whatever was handy to the drink. One gremlin, sitting at the end of the bar, even developed a taste for bitters, throwing a tantrum when Kate finally ran out. Now, though not much more than a half hour had passed since the gremlins had arrived, Kate was exhausted, and Dory's pub looked like a cross between party headquarters on election night and Omaha Beach the morning after D-Day. The air, smelly and sticky, was filled with flying objects, bottles, glasses, cue sticks, billiard balls, chairs, whatever was not nailed down. A raucous babble of foreign sounds, squeals, and high-pitched giggling kept the tension level dangerously high. Amid the noise, a few passed-out bodies lay on the floor, which oozed with spilled drinks, bits of food, and crushed popcorn. Kate fought back an increasingly powerful urge to scream and make a run for the door, acts which she knew would call attention to her and perhaps seal her fate forever. "Just keep calm," she murmured over and over again. "Sooner or later there'll be a chance to make a break, or help will come, or they'll all pass out at once." She wasn't sure she believed it, but it made sense to continue to serve them. At least she was invisible, or visible only when they needed a drink. As more gremlins drifted into the pub and supplies began to run low, however, the devilish creatures became more onerous and overbearing. Although she could not understand their language, Kate noted that the typical gremlin drunk and his human counterpart displayed the same impatience when service didn't keep up with their needs. Faces leered openly, no longer bothering to feign coolness. Some seemed to delight in holding her up, shouting in her ears, deliberately spilling drinks, anything to keep her from doing her job. "Where is everybody?" she hissed between clenched teeth. "Aren't there any cops in this town?" Suddenly a cigar-sucking gremlin popped up in front of her, waiting to be served. Kate poured him a drink. Screeching angrily, he threw the glass and its contents into the crowd near the pool table, clawed the counter, and seemed about to leap at Kate. "What?" she yelled. The creature gestured to his dead cigar. "Why didn't you just say so?" Kate muttered. She located the butane lighter and moved it quickly toward the gremlin's face, snapping it on. A jet of flame 6 inches high shot from the lighter, causing the gremlin to squint, grunt in pain, and stumble backwards. "Sorry," Kate murmured. As she adjusted the flame to a lower level, a plan was forming in her mind. Those rules Billy mentioned when he turned the Mogwai over to Mr. Hanson. Wasn't one of them something about avoiding bright, direct light? Of course, Kate reassured herself. That's why the gremlin with the cigar didn't care much for the high flame when it came close to his eyes. Kate looked around. If direct light was her ally, she was mired deep in enemy territory. Why couldn't she have been trapped in the bank or an office building? Then her only problem would have been getting to the switches in order to turn on the overhead lights and escape in the pain and confusion. Dory's pub was a completely different situation. Dimly lit, there was not an overhead light throughout the entire lounge area. They called it romantic, old-fashioned, cozy. But for Kate, it was a trap. Unless Dory kept a flashlight or two behind the bar, she had no way of using light as her secret weapon. He's got to have a flashlight, she thought, flinging open doors and panels, all the while continuing her duties as a waitress, punching bag, and slave to the green masses at the bar. Probably having gotten bored with pool, video games, food, and drink, she noted that they were becoming more and more obnoxious. Kate was gradually losing her patience too, her annoyance and fear rising as she went through one drawer filled with useless junk after another. "Can't believe it," she whispered angrily. "There's nothing, absolutely nothing. How can a bar not have a flashlight behind the counter?" There were several packs of matches, she noted, all gaily decorated in green and white with the outline of a four-leaf clover, a shillelagh, and the telephone number and address of Dory's pub. For a moment she toyed with the idea of setting them on fire one pack at a time, holding them before her, forcing the gremlins to retreat like Dracula with a crucifix. Lots of luck, she thought. Such a strategy might irritate the closest gremlins, but there was so little shock value in the pack of slowly burning matches. She had no faith in the plan. Still, she mused, if it's the only game in town. A claw reached around her waist as a second, not belonging to the same owner, grabbed at her arm. Twisting away, Kate walked quickly to the middle of the bar, trying not to appear frightened or intimidated. The two gremlins followed, elbowing their way through the double and triple layers of fellow carousers packed along the rail of the bar. Clutched in her left hand, which she was carefully but casually tucking between her apron, were the packs of matches, Kate's only slim hope. If she could get them all in a single ashtray and light the whole thing at once, maybe, just maybe. Two more gremlins seated at the center bar reached out for her, the more aggressive one lying flat on his belly in order to grab Kate's thigh. As he did so, a roar of approbation burst from the other gremlins near the scene. Reacting instinctively, Kate picked up the nearest bottle and slammed it alongside the gremlin's head, not pulling her punch in the slightest degree. A heavy liquid thunk, like a cantaloupe hitting the floor, told her that the blow was solid. As the creature nose-dived onto the bar, its eyes rolling up into the top of its head and the smile collapsing into a confusion of flaccid, drooling lips, Kate felt the first surge of relief since her ordinary evening of waitressing had turned into a torture test. Following her knockout blow, Kate noted grimly that the reaction of the other gremlins was not exactly what she had expected. Humans, even construction workers, Kate thought ironically, would have laughed at the comeuppance rendered on their buddy, partly because an innate sense of justice would have told them that the vilest drunk, that the grabber got what he deserved. Apparently, the gremlins didn't look at it this way, instead regarding Kate's act of self-defense as an attack on them all. In a moment, the quasi-happy jabbering changed to an ominous rumble as the gremlins angrily debated what to do with this evil person. Uh-oh, Kate thought, quickly picking up the drift of their muttering. Unless I miss my guess, they're talking about me. Looks like it's match time. She hastily began tearing up the matches from the books and putting them into an ashtray. shielding her actions by leaning against the cash register. It was while fumblingly doing this that she saw the camera. It was Dory's Instamatic, carefully stashed out of sight behind the register, and it had a flash cube, a perfect offensive weapon that could open a pathway out of captivity. She grabbed it with a quick, compulsive gesture that was not lost on the gremlins at the bar. There was no time to plan the best way out or gain a head start before using the flash cube. And in fact, the hordes were already pouring over the counter so fast, Kate barely had time to get the camera in position, find the button, and push. Her mind wasn't even allowed a moment for the dubious luxury of agonizing over the possibility that the device wouldn't work. Pachee-ink! The sudden burst of light from the flashbulb created an immediate vacuum at the bar, gremlins tumbling backwards and over each other in the reaction to the pain. Kate used the precious seconds of chaos to race to her right and fling herself out around the right side of the counter. There she ran into a new group of angry gremlins. A second explosion of light gouged a 6-foot wedge of empty floor space ahead of her. She plunged forward, trying not to notice that the clutching claws immediately behind her. Now the green creatures were mobilized by fury, their screeching chorus swirling around Kate like vaporized hatred. As she advanced spastically towards the door, she realized they had no intention of taking prisoners in this small but bitter conflict. Blocked once more by a new curtain of green-brown bodies and vengeful eyes, but now within sight of the exit, she pushed the button again. Pachee-ink! Thank God, she thought, it worked. Struggling forward into the temporary no-man's land, she stumbled into the foyer. A split second later, gremlins were all about her, screaming and clawing. She could feel pinpricks of pain all over her body as they fought to get a good claw's grip on her. One hand against the wall to keep from falling, she brought the camera forward again. Let it work one more time, she prayed. Just once. The camera clicked. But this time, there was no detonation of brightness, no howl of pain and rage from the enemy, no recoiling in terror away from her. Instead, they surged forward around their target like waves breaking over a rock. Kate let go of the camera, heard herself scream, could not help falling forward into the turgid green sea with its clawed wavelets reaching for her. Even as she fell, Kate saw a huge flash of light against the foyer wall. Their giggles of vengeful glee turned to shrieks of pain. The gremlins scattered to the shadows, leaving Kate alone on the floor, her torn clothes and body bathed in a trapezoidal pattern of illumination shaped by the front windows. For a moment, Kate's numbed mind worked sluggishly. Had the fall somehow triggered the flash cube? Then, as she freed herself from the shock of the past few moments, she realized the lights came from outside, that the headlights of a car were pointed directly into the building. Not knowing how long these saving beams would last, she scrambled to her feet as quickly as she could and raced out the door. Outside, a figure that had just gotten out of the car called her name in a familiar voice. "Billy!" Kate shouted back. "Are you all right?" he asked, folding his arms around her when she ran to him. "I think so, but those things... How many are there?" "I don't know," Billy replied. "They're everywhere. I thought they'd gotten you too." "Me too? Who else?" "We don't have time to stand here talking about it," Billy said. "We gotta get help. I don't know what..." As he spoke, the idling VW started to miss, its rhythm punctuated by heavy lurches and a slamming sound from the rear. Leaping into the car, Billy stabbed at the gas pedal, but in his haste gave the engine too much fuel. With a single gag, it died. "Not now!" Billy swore. Kate got in beside him. "Is it all right?" she asked. "I'd like to get away from here soon." "It's temperamental," Billy replied, turning the key. When the engine failed to start immediately, he turned off the lights and sat back. "What are you doing?" Kate whispered. "Giving up?" "No, it's just that it may be flooded, so it's best to wait a minute or two. But the lights. Leaving them on will wear down the battery. A beer bottle slammed against the windshield, creating a spider web of broken glass and frightening Kate and Billy nearly out of their wits. That's why I asked about the lights, Kate murmured. It's the only thing keeping them away. Another heavy object smashed into the windshield. Maybe we'd better run, Kate suggested. Just a second, Billy said. Turning the ignition key once more, he ground away for nearly a minute without success. Meanwhile, a hail of ashtrays, bottles, and pool table accessories bounced off the hood or clunked against the side of the car. Yeah, Billy said finally. You're right. Reaching into the back of the car, he grabbed the knapsack with such a jerk that Gizmo nearly fell completely out, his fall being broken only by his feet getting tangled in the strap. Grumbling in Mogwai, he ducked back inside and then reemerged, only the tip of his nose and eyes showing. Not recognizing Gizmo in the darkness, Kate recoiled, thinking the car had been infiltrated by gremlins. It's okay, Billy said. It's only Giz. Let's go. Getting out of the car, they dashed through the barrage of objects flying from the tavern, pausing only when they had crossed the street. They looked at each other and smiled, both realizing at the same time that they were just outside the bank, the door of which was open. Can you beat that? Billy said. They even found a way to get into the bank after closing hours. Maybe we'd better check and see if everything's all right, Kate suggested. Billy agreed. They went inside and turned on the lights, which caused a scurrying of feet out the back door. In the harsh glow of the overhead incandescent lights, the vandalized bank looked as if a typhoon had recently passed through. All of the tellers' windows were broken. Pieces of furniture lay on their sides, cash drawers were open, and money of all denominations was everywhere. I guess they figured it was just useless paper to them, Billy said. And to make sure it would be useless to everybody else, they tore all the bills in pieces, Kate pointed out, picking up several mutilated dollars, and then letting them fall back to the littered floor. Boy, I think I'll quit this job, she added, looking around at the monetary mess. We'll never get this to tally. Yeah. A soft moan echoed through the bank, causing them to exchange chilled expressions. Who's there? A distant voice asked. I can hear somebody. May I be of assistance? Sounds like Gare, Billy remarked. Kate nodded. We're not open for business yet, but it's all right to come in and chat, Gerald Hopkins's voice said in an uncharacteristically agreeable tone. He must be in the vault, Kate said. Billy took her hand, and together they walked past the executive offices to the room at the end of the corridor. Its door was ajar. Is somebody out there? Gerald's voice asked. He sounded distracted, sing-songy, almost drugged. Billy pushed the door open, and gingerly they entered the room. Kate gasped. The vault and anteroom were in total disarray. But that was the least terrifying element that they saw. On the floor lay the inert body of Roland Corbin, his features relaxed as if he were enjoying an afternoon nap. Kate and Billy knew immediately that he was not sleeping, however. Poor Mr. Corbin, Kate breathed. Their eyes rising from the floor at the same time, they saw Gerald Hopkins in the background, apparently locked in the securities room of the vault. Gripping the steel bars like a penitentiary inmate, he smiled out at them, speaking in a deferential but firm tone of voice. I'm so sorry, he said. You're both too big to use this bank. What? Billy responded, puzzled. This bank is for little people only, Gerald explained. He held his palm approximately waist-high, and then continued in the same strange voice. We're going to redecorate the entire bank, lower the tellers' windows, make the furniture smaller, everything so the little people will feel more at home here. He gestured grandly, but in a sort of slow motion, as if he were in a trance or dreaming. This is going to be the first bank just for little people, he said softly. Think of it. And I'm the president. Kate and Billy stole sidelong glances at each other. If you ask me, I think his buttons are in the wrong buttonholes, Kate whispered. Could be, Billy replied. The world has needed a facility for little people for a long time, Gerald intoned. And now, with me as their leader, they're going to get it. Little people, Billy said. Do you mean the Gremlins? I don't know what they're called. All I know is they talk very fast and so funny Mr. Corbin didn't understand them. That's why they... He broke off then, frowning. Yes, Billy urged. Go on. Never mind, it's too unpleasant. All I can say is that Mr. Corbin didn't want to go along with the little people. Of course, he's quite old and set in his ways. That's why he didn't understand their needs. But I did. So they established me as the first president of their bank. Just as I thought, Kate whispered. He's as soft as a nickel cantaloupe. Gerald Hopkins fixed Billy with a gaze that was somehow both intense and vacant. You can be my head teller if you promise to be respectful to the little people, he said. Your name escapes me, but I remember your face. With that, he threw his head back and giggled in a way that was eerily close to that of the Gremlins. Yes, but I'll let you work for me. Minimum wage, naturally. I can't believe this, Kate breathed, shaking her head. I told you terrible things always happen at Christmas time. It's not the holidays' fault, Billy murmured. Now, if you'll pardon me, I have a lot of work to do, Gerald said in a more formal tone. People who will be investing in the new bank are coming soon, so I have to be ready. Would you like us to see if we could get the door open? Billy asked. No, it's perfectly all right. Good day. He smiled blandly, but with a certain finality, and returned to the inside of the vault. Taking a seat at the small desk inside, he began writing with an instrument that, if not imaginary, was invisible to Kate and Billy. When the Gremlins raided this place and attacked Mr. Corbin, I guess it was too much for him, Billy said. His mind must have gone. At first I thought he was putting on an act for us, but now... Poor guy. Well, Kate shrugged. At least he got his own bank now. That seems to have made him happy. As Gerald continued working at his desk, Kate and Billy quietly left the room. What's next? Kate asked. I don't know. A moment later, they stood at the entrance of the bank, staring out at the deserted streets of Kingston Falls. Where do you suppose everybody is? Kate murmured. The town seemed like an old movie set, no sign of life intruding on its eerie serenity. A few small lights glowed in houses, but that was all. Everybody must be hiding in their basements or attics until help comes, Billy suggested. Either that or they got in their cars and left. He looked at his watch. It was 4 o'clock. Not very long until daybreak, he added. I wonder what the Gremlins will do when the sun comes out. Probably find a dark place and hang out until night again, Kate said. Yeah. I think we should find a radio and see what's going on. If they haven't destroyed the station, we might be able to find out something. Good idea, Billy seconded. Suppose we were the only ones left in town because the government decided to nuke the whole place. Wouldn't that be funny? Hilarious. I think there's a radio in Mr. Corbin's office. Yes. They went back into the bank and rooted through the debris. Mr. Corbin's desk radio had been smashed and its cord chewed to a frazzle. But in one drawer they found some small transistor radios the bank used as gifts for new accounts. One of them still worked. Pete, stay in your homes until the official all-clear is given. Lieutenant General David Green of the United States Marine Barracks in Phoenix is here now and has agreed to take a valuable minute of his time in order to explain what his troops, who are already standing by nearby Kingston Falls, are going to do. General Green? Thank you, Harmon. First of all, We're urging everyone to stay indoors. That will make our job a whole lot easier. You see, we don't really know what these small creatures are, having only just arrived and having nothing but reports to go on. Now, they could be marauders or a new form of life form from an alien galaxy. That's a long shot, but we like to be flexible. That's why we're not coming into your town with flamethrowers and machine guns and rocket launchers. We don't want to destroy property or endanger lives, and we do want to take these animals or people alive. That sounds like a good juggling act, General Green. How do you plan to do that, sir? Well, we hope to literally flush these invaders or troublemakers into the open. You see, rather than rely on weaponry, we procured and brought with us several huge portable pumps and fire hoses. What we'll begin doing in about 30 minutes as soon as our pumps are loaded is go from building to building looking for these things. When we find them, instead of firing on them or taking a chance on having them injure our men, we intend to turn the hoses on and round them up that way. You know, there's a lot you can do with a heavy stream of water directed the right way. That sounds like a terrific plan, General Green. Terrific, Billy exploded. It's terrible. If they come here with hoses and spray a lot of water around, we'll have millions of gremlins instead of a few hundred. Then we've got to head off those soldiers, Kate said calmly. Talk them out of it. Have you ever tried to talk a general out of a plan he's devised? No, have you? No, but in the movies it never works. Well, maybe this time it'll be different. After all, Billy, you know more than they do. Yeah, I know, Billy said. It is my fault. I'm to blame for this whole mess. There's no time to worry or blame now. If you're going to talk these troops out of using water, maybe you should have a better plan on how to round up the gremlins. Billy sighed and nodded. They were at the entrance of the bank again. Billy looked both ways on Main Street, scratched his head thoughtfully. Wait a minute, he said finally. Where are the gremlins anyway? The same as before, I suppose, Kate replied, going from building to building. But there's nothing moving. I don't hear or see anything, do you? No, now that you mention it. Billy hopped off the sidewalk and began walking quickly in the direction of Dory's pub. Kate followed. Where are you going? She asked when she caught up with him. Not back in the pub, I hope. Yeah. Why? Just a hunch. Her features reflecting her anxiety, Kate trailed behind him. She had no desire to return to Dory's if those creatures were still inside. On the other hand, if he had an idea how to get rid of the greenies and needed her help, she had no alternative but to go along with him. And despite the perils she had been through, there was still something in her that rose to the challenge when her courage was tested. Do you have a flashlight in your car? She asked. Good idea, Billy said. The battered VW was still there at the curbside, looking worse than ever, as the centerpiece of the garbage shower hurled at it from the pub. Billy reached inside the car and found the flashlight on the seat, which glowed yellowishly. I'd estimate we have less than a minute's life left in that thing, Kate predicted. That may be just enough, he said. Billy in the lead, they edged their way into the foyer of the pub. Every second Kate expected to be engulfed by either a new barrage of missiles or by the gremlins themselves, their claws flashing. She doubted that the flashlight would be much help in deterring a gremlin attack, its weak beam projecting only a few feet into the darkness. When no assault came, she began to feel better, especially when they turned the corner and moved into the main lounge area. There, by the subdued indirect lighting of the room, they saw wreckage and destruction of monumental proportions, but there wasn't a single gremlin in sight. Billy looked around, whistled softly as his eyes took in the wall-to-wall panorama of vandalism. Poor Dory, he said sadly. What do you mean, poor Dory? Kate protested with a bit of a laugh. It was almost poor me, but for the grace of God, I could be one of those piles of trash. Squeezing his arm, she added quickly, And thanks to you, of course." Billy's expression was a mixture of pleasure and mild embarrassment. They stood silently for a moment. Finally, Billy said, "Well, where do you suppose they all went?" "Beats me," Kate shrugged. They walked back outside, stood on the sidewalk, and continued their puzzled surveillance of Kingston Falls's forsaken town square. Billy wondered how long it would be before the Marines showed up with their fire hoses. Perhaps they were already inspecting homes and buildings at the far end of town. Still hoping to first locate the Gremlins and then find a way of dealing with them, he closed his eyes, straining his mind to think. Think. "Where would I go if I were a gremlin?" he said aloud. "A gremlin who's afraid of bright light, with sunrise on the way," Kate added. "Good," he said. "That's important. I guess, putting myself in their place, I'd try to find a big building, with no windows, so I could hide. You know, they tend to stick together. I'll bet if we can find one of them, that's where all of them will be." "So, how many buildings can there be without windows?" Kate asked. "Just 2, and they're both at the end of the next block." Billy started to run, and then spun and hopped into the VW, giving the key a turn just on the off chance the engine would turn over. It did. Kate hopped in beside him. A minute later, he slowed the car as they moved through the intersection of Main and Garfield. On one corner was the Colony movie theater, its marquee still advertising, "Now White and the Seven Dwarfs." On the adjacent corner was the Montgomery Ward department store. One of the entrance doors to Montgomery Ward hung open as evidence of the fact that sometime during the night some gremlins had found a way inside. Billy parked the car and got out. He was frankly undecided as to which building to try first, until he noticed that Gizmo's head was completely out of the knapsack, his nose twitching nervously. "Which one, Giz?" Billy asked. Gizmo peered anxiously but meaningfully at the movie theater. "Then let's go," Billy said. It soon became evident that Gizmo's nose was working well, for as they neared the theater they saw countless gremlin claw prints in front. Other evidence of the devilish creature's presence could be seen in the numerous bits of vandalism: broken glass, a door hanging askew from a single hinge, 3-pronged scratches along the walls. "I guess this is the place, all right," Kate said, surveying the damage. Gizmo waved his arms, put one paw over his mouth, and cocked an ear. From inside the theater auditorium emanated a continuous rush of sound made up of giggles, yelps, and conversational jabber, in more or less equal parts. "Sounds loud enough to be all of them," Billy said hopefully. "Well, now that we've found them, what do we do about it?" Kate asked. "I'm thinking." Negotiating their way between the bits of glass and overturned lobby furniture and ashtrays, they moved quietly into the deserted lobby, the floor of which was littered with crumpled wads of popcorn and torn candy wrappers. "They sure are sloppy eaters," Kate observed. "Of course, it must have been hard to eat popcorn with fangs like theirs that are so far apart. It keeps falling out of the spaces. Another thing I noticed about them." As Kate's voice grew in volume, Billy looked at her a bit sharply. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I guess I'm rambling because I'm nervous. Just the thought of those guys coming at me again gives me the creeps." Billy nodded. "I understand." "I'll be quiet," she promised. Huddled near the back of the lobby, the three listened to the babble of gremlin voices for a long moment. Kate wondered if they were involved in a heated discussion of some issue, or just conversing idly. From her previous experience with them, she knew that they were intelligent creatures, diabolically so. Did they know now that they faced a crisis with the approach of dawn? If so, were they working up a plan of action in the event that they be discovered and attacked? At that moment, Kate would gladly have given a month's pay to understand what they were saying. But that was impossible, of course. "Couldn't we just bolt the doors or nail them shut?" she finally whispered to Billy. "That would keep them inside until help came." It's an idea, but I don't think it'll work, he replied. Some doors are off the hinges, the glass is cracked or broken. If we tried to fix that, we'd be discovered before we finished. But there is one possibility. Grabbing her suddenly by the arm, Billy pulled Kate around the corner of a vending machine and put his finger to his lips. Clawed feet could be heard scratching on the tile floor of the lobby. But it was only one set, Billy noted thankfully, hoping the thump of his beating heart didn't carry across the room. A moment later, when the sound of the footsteps stopped, Billy and Kate peeked around the edge of the machine. The gremlin with the flowing white mane was scooping up the last of the popcorn from the front and corners of the glass display case, slurping noisily as he shoveled pieces into his mouth. After a gigantic belch, he shuffled back into the auditorium. That was Stripe, Billy said. He's the smartest of the bunch and probably their leader, unless I miss my guess. Now, what was the other possibility? Kate asked. Blowing them up, Billy replied. With what? Do you happen to have a few sticks of dynamite in your car? Billy shook his head. Maybe something better. I used to work in this theater just after high school. If it still has the same boiler problems, we may be in business. I don't get you. The boiler kept building up pressure, Billy explained. But the fellow who owned the place was too cheap to install a new one. Instead, he put on this release valve that you had to check at least 3 times a day to make sure it was still working. He kept saying that if anything happened to that valve, we'd all be blown to kingdom come. Suppose the valve's disconnected or turned off? Kate asked. Like the man said, I guess, Billy murmured. Poof! Okay, but will it be seconds, minutes, hours, or days before the explosion? He didn't say. That's too bad, because it's important, don't you think? If it's a matter of seconds, we'll check out with the Gremlins. Billy nodded. Yeah, I think there'll be time, though at least a couple of minutes. But that's my problem, not yours. What do you mean? I mean there's no reason all of us should go down into the boiler room. As a matter of fact, 2 bodies will make twice as much noise. But you may need help. What kind of help? Somebody to hold the flashlight while you work? It's not much light, but it may be the difference between getting the job done quickly and fumbling around in the dark. Yeah, Billy admitted. But... No more debate, okay? Kate interrupted. Now, let's go before I lose my nerve. All right, you take Gizmo. Handing the knapsack to Kate, he led her across the lobby to the maintenance room door. It was locked. Does this mean our demolition derby's off? Kate asked, disappointment and hope mingling in her voice. No, there's another way to get into the basement, but we'll have to cross the back of the balcony. Uh-oh. I couldn't have said it better myself. You ready? As I'll ever be. Staying close to the wall, Billy led the way up the balcony stairs. At the top, he put his hand on Kate's arm, indicating that she would have to keep her head down while crossing the back of the balcony. The seats were not as high as he remembered them to be, nor was the rear aisleway as wide. Thus, they were forced to move with their heads nearly between their knees, a torturous duck waddle through the darkness. Above and in front of them, gremlin chatter continued. Occasionally, a piece of popcorn or a crumpled cardboard box landed on their shoulders or caroomed off the wall. But they finally arrived at the opposite side of the balcony, and the red door with the black stenciling that read, Employees Only. Stretched out nearly prone, Billy eased the door ajar and held it open so that Kate could enter. He then followed, breathing a deep sigh of relief now that they had some space between themselves and the gremlins. A narrow spiral staircase whirlpooled downward into the darkness of the basement. Kate and Billy half slid, half fell down into the musty metal steps, using the flashlight sparingly in order to save the weak batteries. When they reached the bottom, Billy took the lead again, groping his way into the boiler room. Turn on the light, he whispered. I think the valve should be about here. The pale light, moving back and forth across the ceiling, revealed a temple of electrical cables, joists, pipes, decomposing insulation, and finally, the release valve Billy remembered so well. It's still here, he said, grinning. Moving a few feet away to the boiler itself, he smiled broadly when he saw the pressure gauge. It's really high, he added, even with the release valve working. Great, Kate said sardonically. Maybe it'll blow up so fast we won't even be able to make it back across the balcony. We won't have to do that, he said. There's a small door out of the basement that works only from the inside. We'll be able to use that. Grabbing a wrench from the top of the boiler, he returned to the release valve. We had to make sure this stayed open, he explained as he began working. But it couldn't be too far open or the steam would escape into the basement and theater. Now, let's see what happens when she's closed all the way. Working the wrench quickly and efficiently as Kate held the light, he twisted the valve until it refused to turn another fraction of an inch. Now, let's get out of here, he said. Kate, needing no urging, followed, rapping her head and elbows several times as they rushed precipitously across the low-ceiling room, jammed with crates and boxes. Above them, a steady rumble, punctuated by occasional loud raps, indicated that the restless gremlins were still twisting, turning, and jabbering in their seats. Ahead of them, a recess in the corner of the room held a narrow metal door, rusty at the corners. Billy reached it first, gave it a strong push. No, he cried out. No! It's not locked, Kate whispered, horrified. It can't be, he said. He slammed his shoulder against the door, again and again, but it refused to open. I guess it's just stuck, he said, attacking it once more. It hasn't been used for a long time. Are you sure it opens out? Kate asked. In the darkness, it was difficult to see how the door was mounted. Yeah, he replied. I used it once. Searching about for something, anything to help him with, Kate's hand fell on a cold metal object. Try this, she said. Billy took the crowbar with a little smile of thanks, wedged the end of it near the upper corner, and pushed with all of his might. The door moved outward grudgingly, a crack of perhaps a half-inch appearing. Encouraged, but rapidly becoming exhausted, Billy moved the crowbar down and pushed again. Finally, after a half-dozen solid thrusts, the door sprang open with a rusty, yawning sound. Outside it was considerably lighter than it had when they entered the theater, most of the stars having vanished in the first glow of dawn. This way, hurry, Billy said, grabbing Kate's hand and leading her to the right. Still holding the crowbar, he pushed to insert it through the handles of the theater's rear exit doors, then raced toward a small alleyway across the street. Suppose it doesn't, Kate began. Her question was choked off by a muffled crash, then a grinding noise so loud it seemed as if all the machinery in the world were breaking down at once. A split second later, a huge flash of flame arced its way from the basement level to the roof in one upside-down lightning stroke, sending smaller crimson explosions leaping outward. 3 blasts followed in quick succession, forcing the theater's side outward and then shattering it like an oil tanker being torpedoed. In hardly more than a minute, the structure was converted to a vast brazier of fire rapidly becoming obscured under an impenetrable pall of smoke and dust. It worked, Billy said. Kate, smiling slightly at his master stroke of understatement, could only nod. Their initial rush of exhilaration was dampened a moment later when through the holes in the theater wall they could see the forms of struggling, dying gremlins. Grisly dancing silhouettes rising briefly from the flames only to sink back a moment later. Why did we have to do that? Kate asked, looking away. Billy didn't answer. No doubt he would think about it later, but for the moment he was intent on making sure that the job, albeit unpleasant, was at least complete. Their position in the alleyway was perfect for watching all three theater exits. Kate's eyes were downcast, and Gizmo ducked down into the knapsack to avoid the flames, but Billy's eyes remained riveted on all three exits. Another few minutes passed. The roar, at first so loud it seemed in back of them as well as in front, gradually diminished to a steady hiss. All signs of movement within the theater also disappeared. "I think maybe we got all of them," Billy said finally. But the words were hardly out of his mouth when a single figure stumbled through the charred front door of the rapidly deteriorating structure, stood for a moment as if in shock, then shook its white-maned head and padded across the street. "No!" Billy heard himself say. "No, no, no!" Well, thanks again for joining me for a read of Chapter 18 of Gremlins, the novelization. We're going to pick up next week with Chapter 19. In the meantime, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the show. And don't forget to check out our other show, News. And, of course, check out the merchandise store if you'd like to take a look at some of our cool t-shirts and whatnot. Until next time.